Yeah, there we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. We're going to give a couple of minutes for everybody to start rolling in, but we have popped a poll up. So it's only got 3 questions. One of them's a fun question. If you would like to answer or participate in the poll, we would love that. And we'll give everybody just a minute or two to roll in and we'll get started. Very interested to see people's peanut butter preferences. I feel like that's a really important question in life. What kind of peanut butter? Unless you're allergic, and then if you are, I'm so sorry. I will choose an allergy-free question next time. I promise.
Well, there could be a preference on sunflower seed butter.
Yes, okay. It doesn't have to be peanut butter, or it can be any sort of butter, unless you're allergic to walnuts. We've got 1 vote for smooth, so good start so far.
To be clear, not like regular dairy butter. I don't know that it comes in chunky or smooth.
Oh, hmm. I guess it depends on how you like it. Like the people who bite a raw bite out of an onion and eat it like an apple or potato. Welcome, everybody. For those who are just joining us, we do have a poll up. We would love, it's just 3 questions, so please feel free to fill it out. One of the questions is fun. Just something to do in the meantime. Also, just very interested in knowing what texture of peanut butter you like, or any sort of butter, almond butter. What other kind? I'm sure there's other types of butter. Sunflower butter, salted butter. All right, everybody. So I think that it is safe for us to go ahead and get started. I will leave the poll up. So if you decide that you'd like to participate, you are welcome to do so. So welcome to Identity Hygiene Live. We are back again and we are talking about ownership today. So Rosie is going to be our presenter, our VP of Strategy and Solution Engineering, and really excited to have you here. Please feel free to register for the next episode. We already have that up, and we will, if you have questions at any point during this, please feel free to drop them in. We'll answer those towards the end, but if at any point you come up with a question, feel free to ask and we'll cover all of them before we close out. So without further ado, Rosie, take it away.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks everyone for joining today. So today's discussion is going to be around ownership. If you listen to the webinar from last month, we talked about intelligent discovery and the importance of discovery. In that discussion, we actually did touch a little bit on ownership. And we thought that it'd be interesting this month to take a deeper dive into ownership. What is it? Why is it important? Why is it something you should be thinking about? And ultimately, how do you accomplish this very, very critical piece of the puzzle to solve your cybersecurity and your identity hygiene issues? So I like to always start these with a quote. Again, like I said last month, I use other people's intelligence to make myself look smart. So I want to read to you a quote from Pat Summitt, one of the most successful female basketball coaches ever. And she said, "Responsibility equals accountability equals ownership. And a sense of ownership is the most powerful weapon a team or organization can have." And this is exactly what we're talking about today. It's not just about ownership, but accountability, right? And taking responsibility. Now, how does that apply to what we're talking about? Well, what exactly is ownership? So, ownership is really finding that one individual or group of individuals that can take that responsibility for an asset in the organization. That asset could be anything. It could be an account. Might think of a service account or a secondary admin account. It could be a database. It could be an application. It could be a server. These are the assets in the organization that inevitably will have a requirement to make a change, right? We'll have a requirement for a change, whether it's for security reasons or just administrative reasons. You need that person that fully understands how this application works or how this server works. So who should have access to this group in order to say, security person, it is okay to make the change that you would like to make in order to resolve a security issue, in order to eliminate a violation or enforce a control. So ownership really is that person who, by the way, sometimes is not a technical person. It could be someone on the business side. You would go to someone who, let's say, runs HR to ask, well, who should be the people that are part of the HR distribution list? That is a business question, right? Not a technical question. And that's why it's important to have that owner that is close to that asset. Again, whether it's a distribution list or a server or an application, and can say, these are the end users, these are the accounts, these are the identities that should have access to this resource that I fully take ownership for. So what are some of these owners' responsibilities? Like what do we ask of these owners? Well, number one, the very first thing is they have to confirm ownership, right? They have to say, yes, I do take responsibility. Yes, I agree that I am the right person who should make decisions about what happens to this asset. So ownership confirmation is very, very important, right? Because it's that human being saying, yes, I agree to take the responsibility for this thing. Without that, you really don't have an owner, right? You kind of have a proposed owner, someone you think is the owner. But until that human being says, yes, I am taking responsibility for this, you don't really have an owner, or definitely don't have a confirmed owner. Next is they have to own that access. They have to understand who should or should not have access to that asset and be able to tell you who should or shouldn't have access, right? The removing access from someone that should not have access to one of these assets is the very definition of essentially maintaining risk, right? And reducing risk. So they have to have that understanding and they have to own that responsibility. Next, they have to understand the change. If you, as an infrastructure person, as a security person, want to make a change to either clean something up, reduce risk, or for any number of reasons, that owner has to understand what that change means and the implications of that change. Now, that doesn't have to necessarily be a technical discussion. Again, let's go back to the example of someone in HR, and you're asking the head of HR, these are the people that are in your distribution list, the people that you email every day through this distribution list. This is your list. Should those people be in there? Yes or no? And if they're not, they shouldn't be in there, I will take them out. Again, it's not overly technical, not complicated. You could definitely make the head of HR understand what that change is, and more importantly, give you the own the fact that they are responsible for telling you who should or shouldn't be in that distribution list, and then finally actually tell you, yes, it is okay to do that change because someone in marketing happens to be in that distribution list and they don't belong there. And finally, all this culminates into them taking ownership of that operational risk. Again, let's go back to the HR example. The head of HR says, take this person out, take Sarah out of this distribution list. Sarah is taken out. Sarah actually belongs in that distribution list because she is still in HR and she misses a critical email. Well, whose fault is that? Well, if you had not found the owner and the owner hadn't told you to remove Sarah from that distribution list, and you took the initiative and just removed Sarah from that distribution list, well, you would have been responsible as an infrastructure person, as a security person for that operational risk. By going to the owner and having the owner tell you the essentially business requirements, they take on that operational risk. And one of the expectations from these owners is that they are taking on that operational risk. So here's some example questions that you might ask an owner. Number one, do you still own this? And if you don't, who should the owner be, right? Kind of essentially reassigning that ownership. Can we retire the asset? There's so many things that and legacy systems, old accounts lying around, old servers that without checking with this owner, hey, do you actually still need this thing? They're just going to continue to sit there, right? Not be used and potentially represent a risk, right? They could be compromised. A simple question is, hey, do you still need this? Again, not overly technical. It could be technical. You could be going to a server a person and saying, "Hey, can we retire the server?" Or it could be you're going to the HR and saying that again, that HR example, and saying, "There's this distribution list where you have a bunch of people in it. It's not your main distribution list. Can we get rid of it because it's called Project X and that project ended 6 months ago?" Who on your team should have access? Very simple question, right? Again, if we take that distribution list example, could be a file share, right, for the marketing team, and asking the marketing team, well, who in marketing should have access to this? Level of access, again, non-technical, simple question. Maybe some people in marketing need to have read access to this particular share. Other people need to have read and write. Um, and so on. I won't go through the rest of the list, but again, the idea is that we're asking questions about business process. What should we never ask? Well, we should never ask an overly technical question or non-business requirement question specifically to a non-technical owner, right? If you are going to that HR person, you can't talk about, well, I have a bunch of nested subgroups inside your distribution list, and this is how subgroups work. And if someone's in a subgroup and also not in the main group, this is what they're not going to understand that. You have to make it as simple as possible, and you have to ask them the business requirements, not the implementation requirements. You can't ask them questions about, well, how do I go about fixing this issue? It's more about what are your requirements from a business perspective as the owner, as someone who is taking on this operational risk. I am going to ask you the kinds of questions you can answer, not the kinds of questions that will confuse you and make you think, you know what, I'm doing your job now. I shouldn't be doing your job, right? So always think about the kinds of questions that you want to ask. You need to capture from this person what they could actually respond to, right? And generally speaking, you're not going to ask them implementation questions. You're going to ask them business process questions. Why is it important? Well, we talked about operational risk, and operational risk is probably the single most important reason why you have to find ownership, right? Um, but it's more than that, because ultimately you need this person to give you the approval to make this change. You need them to tell you it is okay to make the change. And you also need them to tell you, and that change sometimes could be just retiring the asset, right? But again, the idea is that we are asking them business related questions or process questions so that we can then initiate a change that ultimately will reduce risk. So let's take an example here. So let's say you have a security team, right? And a security team wants to make these changes. They want to do things like get rid of all local accounts and convert them all to domain accounts. Very legitimate, really good thing to do. Remove excessive access from a group. You have a group with thousands of people in it. Well, there really shouldn't be any groups with thousands of people unless they're used for a very specific purpose. Onboard a service account into a vault. Again, another really important thing to do, right? Or remove open access from a share. Critical thing to do when it comes to unstructured data, right? You do not want the entire company to have all this. These are all things that it's the expectation of a security team, of an infrastructure team to take care of. These are all really important examples of ways to reduce risk in an organization. Except that when you make these changes, what could happen is an application can break that was using that local account. Critical user may lose access to critical data. A password is rotated on that onboarded account, and now a critical service or an application stops working. Or, you lose a critical deal because you removed open access from a share, and that investment banker who was using that share, that was the only way they got access to it, through that open access. Again, these things that you want to do that actually will help in terms of reducing risk ultimately ends up in the security team taking on that operational risk because they made that change without having an owner confirm whether or not that change could be made, and whether or not, that more importantly, can this change be made safely. So if instead they are going to that owner, asking the owner to confirm, do you still need this? Do you understand what this change is? Do you fully approve this change? And sometimes, by the way, the owner may say, no, do not make this change. You cannot. It will take down a critical application. And that's the best, even though it delays potentially closing a security issue, the best you can get from an owner is when the owner says, stop, don't do this, it will break something. It means that they fully understand the change. It means that they fully understand what you want to do. They fully understand what they own. They are taking responsibility and they're telling you, no, this will cause an issue. That's a great opportunity to work with that owner, find a compromise, find a solution to then ultimately get to risk reduction. But what ends up happening is when you do this, you resolve these issues safely, right? You take care of all these issues safely. And what ends up happening is the operational risk sits with the owner, but notice that operational risk isn't red now, right? It's an operate. They're taking on the operational risk, but because they understand, they're not increasing the operational risk because they're giving you feedback and telling you don't do this, and everything is done safer. This is why it's so critical, right? Because this is the thing that will delay projects. Getting owners to confirm that they're the owner will absolutely delay any program, but it is the most critical piece because without it, you're risking an undue amount of operational risk. So it's just not easy. It's why is ownership so hard? Why is it something that almost every single customer that I talk to struggles with? Well, the first thing is that traditional ways of maintaining ownership is to do book of records. And book of records, the minute you hit the save button, they're outdated. You're dealing with a constantly changing dynamic environment. People are joining, people are leaving, people are moving. Departments are breaking up. You're buying other small companies and integrating them into the organizations. In a constantly moving environment, constantly dynamic environment like this, it's simply not possible to keep any book of record unless you have a dedicated team and this is all they're doing. It becomes really, really difficult to have a book of record that you're maintaining manually. And of course, ownership is constantly changing, right? Even if all of those things don't happen, everything that I've talked about, people leaving the organization or joining the organization or moving departments, sometimes ownership and responsibilities change within even a department. So this constant changing of responsibility, again, business requirements, right? This constant changing business requirements ultimately means that you're constantly chasing after these changes. The other thing is there's no so if we talk about, okay, if we do this manually, if we have a book of record that we're trying to maintain, it's just not sustainable, right? So okay, great. Let's do some scripting, right? Let's do some automation. Let's do some coding around this. Well, the problem is that there is no single method that just works. There's no way that I can say, okay, for groups, for servers, for accounts, here's that one script, that one method that will work for everything, right? And work for everyone. It doesn't work that way. You need multiple methods, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then finally, ownership equals responsibility. No matter how much it makes sense that someone on the business take that operational or that operational risk, that they take on the responsibility of telling you what their business requirements are, you are asking them to take responsibility. And it is difficult because again, that head of HR could say, you're asking me about this, but I have my full-time job to do. I really don't have time for this right now. And sometimes they just don't know if they should even be the owner of these assets, right? So that responsibility piece is definitely a big element of it. And chasing after that responsibility is one of the reasons why it's just so hard. And as we've been saying, it's not a one-time activity, right? This is both why it's hard and also what you have to do. You know, books of records are constantly outdated because of this change, and ownership is constantly changing because of all of the reasons why you have to constantly chase after this, or why it's so hard to do it in the first place is the same reason why you have to keep doing it, right? It's hard because it's constantly changing, and you have to keep doing it because it's constantly changing. So it's really a some if you, when you tackle this issue, you have to think about it as this is not a one-time activity. This is something that I'm going to be doing constantly. So how do you do it? How do you actually find the owners? Well, as I said, there is no silver bullet. There is no simple way of finding ownership. And what you can do is use some of the metadata from all of the data that you're collecting. Now, remember, last month we talked a lot about intelligent discovery and we talked about what discovery is. Just to recap, discovery is collecting masses of metadata to then make sense of it, right? And one of the things that you make sense of is really ownership, right? It's taking all of that data. What accounts exist? What entitlements do these accounts have? What who are, ultimately who owns these accounts based on what level of access these accounts have, and whether or not those people should have that level of access, then goes into kind of that control and violation discussion that we talk about when we talk about intelligent discovery. But the metadata, whether it's permission data, things like naming convention, descriptions, if you're talking about accounts or groups in Active Directory, all of this gives you clues, but it's just clues, right? It's clues that you then kind of piece together using what we call methods to then say, okay, here's a good proposed owner, right? So all these different methods should work together to give you a starting point. And that starting point we call proposed owner. That is the person that you think is the owner of this asset. But keep in mind that a proposed owner is not a confirmed owner. Confirmed owner is when that human being says, yes, I am taking responsibility for this. So always think about the difference between a proposed owner and confirmed owner. Any scripts that you run, even your book of record, if you think about it, that's just a proposed owner. Until you have that human say, yes, I am confirming that I am taking the operational risk for this, you don't have a confirmed owner. And I would argue without that confirmed owner, you don't really have an owner. At least you don't have an owner where you can take action, right? Where you can actually go and make the change. Until you have that confirmed owner, that proposed owner is just a suggestion, but you should never take action on that proposed owner, the confirmed owner, and that owner telling you, yes, I confirm, and it's okay to make the change. Only then can you make the change that ultimately reduces risk. But not everyone could be an owner, right? And so you have to, no matter how good your scripts are, your methods, how well you're processing that metadata, also keep in mind that sometimes there's certain people that should never be owners. Again, business requirement question, right? This is a business requirement and a policy issue, but there's some people that are too senior. You're not going to reach out to your CEO and ask your CEO, hey, do you own this group, right? Some people are too junior. Maybe they're consultants. Again, they don't qualify for ownership. And any of your methods, any of your scripting, any of your tooling must account for that. It must account for too senior, too junior, or completely excluded. Because that's the other thing. There's certain individuals that you just simply are going to want to exclude. So you have to account for those exclusions, those people that really should not own any of these assets. So here's a couple of examples. I thought it'd be interesting to talk about some of the examples of methods that we've used with success. I'll go over a few of them. Some simple ones like home drives. Well, if you're naming your home drives after the name, the same account name of the user that owns it, very easy, do a match there. Some are more complex, like most senior member. This is where we are looking at all of the members of a group, whether they're directly in a group or nested somewhere in a subgroup, and saying, okay, out of these 10 people, 7 report to Sarah, 3 reports to Bob, Sarah becomes the owner. But again, as I said before, you have to include exceptions. What if Sarah's too senior? What if Sarah is a managing director and you don't believe managing directors should own groups? Or maybe Sarah's a managing director, but she's several levels down from the CEO that now qualifies her for ownership. Right. So these are some of the ways that we kind of run through and try to find that good proposed owner. But keep in mind with these methods, there isn't a single one that you're going to use for your organization. Where we've had success is where we use all of these or some of these in a certain order, in the correct order, and in a way that you can adjust this order and say, you know what, I'm getting this kind of ownership percentage, or I'm getting success with this order and prioritizing this particular method, or I'm getting more success if I move this one higher up. You have to think about when you run these methods and when you develop these methods, ways for you to kind of rearrange them to find that sweet spot where you're getting the most effective owners, or most likely to be the correct owners. So that leads to how we do it here at Sphere and how we do it with Sphere Board. So we have a tool called, and this is part of what we call our ownership engine. So we have a tool called ownership automation. Ownership automation is exactly what I've been describing. We have different methods that you can set up. You can set up the order that these methods run. You could do things like set default owners if maybe you've exhausted all the list and you want to throw everyone else or every other asset that's left in a specific bucket. But the tool allows you to customize and rearrange and do trial and error to find that good proposed owner. And of course, we do this across a number of assets, whether it's accounts or collections, groups, servers. But the idea is that you run ownership automation and we find really good proposed owners, starting points, right? Not confirmed, but really good proposed owners. In later sessions and later webinars, we're going to talk about our ARM tool, how we actually go and crowdsource ownership and then reach out to those owners and get that confirmed owner. But here we're really just talking about getting that proposed owner. And keep in mind that you could be dealing with literally millions of assets in your organization, right? So doing this manually, even with scripting, becomes a huge challenge versus using a tool that was purpose built specifically to solve this issue for you. And I kind of alluded to this, and we will definitely do a much deeper dive on this, but you have to have that confirmed owner, right? In order to make change, you have to have confirmed owner. So part of what we do in our ARM platform, and we'll go much, much more in depth with ARM and all the functionality, as I said in later session, but part of what you can do with ARM is confirm ownership, right? Send out a notification to that owner, have that owner respond and say, yes, I am taking ownership of this. And at that point, now you have a human being who said, I am taking responsibility for this. And I am responsible. I am taking on the operational risk for this so that I can tell you whether or not you can make the change. So we do that with our ownership confirmation through our ARM tool. And then finally, sometimes it just takes an admin, right? Sometimes you have those edge cases, you have those instances where you just, no matter what kind of method you use, maybe this was a one-off, maybe it was a group of accounts that were created in a short period of time by someone incorrectly. So all of your methods don't really hit. Here we have a tool where you could just manually assign ownership because sometimes that's what it takes. So before we jump into questions, I think that just to summarize, the main reason why you do ownership is to get you to remediation. And remember, and more importantly, to get you to remediation safely, right? And remember, the only reason we do remediation is to reduce risk, right? So ownership, we always talk about being the key to everything, right? Because it allows you to move to the next step, which is remediation, which ultimately allows you to get to that risk reduction.
So thank you, Rosie. I really appreciate it. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop those into the Q&A and we will answer those for you while I wait for anybody to drop any questions that they may have in there. We hope that you enjoyed this, and next session we will be discussing identities. So we have a special guest from Paramount coming to speak on our podcast, and then we will present on our webinar. If you haven't checked our podcast out, we have a podcast where we go over these in a more casual way, less presented, earlier in the month, a week before we do our webinars, just to give you time to get a little bit extra context. And we always have a special guest. So we will be discussing identities next month. And if nobody has any questions, then I guess we have wrapped it up here. We will send out a link to you guys with the podcast information, and you will also get a recording of this after we have time to go back and get it. So I really appreciate it, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you so much, everybody.